Good evening and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Emma Redding and I am your MC for this evening. I'd like to start by inviting you to join me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're meeting today. I'd like to pay respects to the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung Boonwurrung people, and pay respects to their ancestors and elders past and present and those who are yet to come. Long before this campus ever existed, for thousands and thousands of generations, people have been dancing their dances, singing their songs, meeting and collaborating on this place. And it's such a privilege to be here to do the same. So welcome. Tonight is all about the intersection of arts and well-being. And we've got some leading academics who research this area from the Faculty of Education and the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music at the University of Melbourne. And what I love about tonight's themes is that in some ways these two terms, arts and well-being, don't really go together. In some ways, arts and science, art, science and well-being. I'm often asked, is that an oxymoron? You know, there's often this kind of oppositional mentality that exists in conversations about art and science. On the one hand, you could think about arts as being, you know, iterative, inductive, open-ended in its methodological approach, speculative. And we might think of science as being more systematic, hypothesis-driven, more reductive in its methodology, answering those questions. And in some ways that's true, but the fact that we have a Centre for Wellbeing Science and we have other centres and institutes at the university which bring so-called disparate disciplines together to solve problems says a lot. And maybe bringing these disciplines together is how we address world problems and world global questions. The fact that you're all here, and this has been a really popular event, thanks for turning up, sort of suggests, kind of demonstrates that there's an interest and potential in this work. So arts and well-being. Let's see what speakers we've got here tonight. They are brilliant and their bios are huge, so I'm not going to read their bios. You've already got copies of those and the links to their bios, but I will just briefly introduce each of our esteemed speakers. So Professor Dianne Vella-Brodrick, Director of the Centre for Wellbeing Science. Professor Dianne Vella-Brodrick holds the Jerry Higgins Chair in Positive Psychology and is Director of the Centre for Wellbeing Science at the University of Melbourne, Melbourne Graduate School of Education. She is the inaugural Director of the Master of Applied Psychology programme and is a registered psychologist and a member of the Australian Psychological Society and College of Health Psychologists. Please give Dianne a round of applause. Professor Jane Davidson. Jane Davidson is Head Faculty Research Centre at the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music, Deputy Director of the Victorian College of the Arts, Professor of Creative and Performing Arts, Head of Opera at the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, and Chair of the Creativity and Wellbeing Initiative, Fellow of the Australian Academy of Humanities. A lot of leadership work going on there. Welcome, Jane. Dr. Anneliese Gill. Anneliese Gill is a lecturer at the Centre for Wellbeing Science at the University of Melbourne, music educator and Fulbright scholar. She has a Master's of Music from the Manhattan School of Music, New York, and a graduate and postgraduate diploma in psychology from Monash University, Melbourne. Welcome, Anneliese. Dr. Derrick Brown-Appenzeller. Derrick is Senior Lecturer in Dance at the Victorian College of the Arts, University of Melbourne. He is a dance and performance science researcher with concentrations in the cognitive psychology and human motor behavior domains. Welcome, Derrick. And Professor Nikki Rickard, Wellbeing Science and Education. Nikki Rickard is Professor of Wellbeing Science in the Faculty of Education, University of Melbourne. Across her extensive career in wellbeing research, her goal has been to support people in the self-management of their own emotional health. Welcome, Nikki. All right, so the panel will discuss how creative and performing arts enhance physical and psychological well-being and how it is possible to measure this impact through health outcomes. They will explore how well-being is defined and measured. Imagine a world without the arts and the health and well-being implications of reducing support for creative and performing arts in public education. Couple of housekeeping notes. A quick note that the bathrooms are located in the basement foyer, in brackets indicate. And in the unlikely event of an emergency, our event staff will advise you of the required action, of course. So please take a moment to observe where your nearest exit is located in case we need to evacuate the venue for any reason. There will be some drinks and light snacks served after the discussion, so we hope that you'll be able to stay and join us in the foyer. So, the provocation that was given to our panel members to address was, at the intersection of art, science, and well-being lie holistic approaches to promote overall health and quality of life. Approaches might involve interdisciplinary research, community programs, creative practice, scientific research, or educational initiatives that draw on the strengths of all three areas to foster a more comprehensive understanding and enhancement of human well-being. What does the intersecting of arts, science, and well-being mean to you? And I'm going to start with Dianne to ask her to define well-being and respond to the provocation. Thank you, Dianne.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's a pleasure to be talking about this really important topic and the intersection, especially between wellbeing and the performing arts. I'm really looking forward to a lively and honest conversation regarding this intersection. And first, let me discuss what we mean by wellbeing. So it's important to understand first what wellbeing isn't. Wellbeing isn't just about the absence of illness. It's about the presence of positive and adaptive qualities. And it's a multidimensional construct. And certainly there are a number of theories within, for example, positive psychology, such as PERMA by Martin Seligman and the psychological well-being theory by Carol Riff, that have identified a number of common dimensions that are often associated with well-being. And these dimensions can include things like positive emotions, engagement and meaning, high-quality relationships, personal growth and accomplishment, self-acceptance, and that includes strengths and limits, as well as autonomy, having volition over your life, or at least feeling like you've got volition over your life. But in essence, what I think is a really good way to describe what well-being is to be thinking about it from this perspective, that it's about finding ways to feel good, finding ways to function effectively, and doing good, not just for yourself, but for others as well. So what does well-being look like in a performing artist? Well, at least ideally. So ideally, a performing artist would go to work with zest and passion for what they do. They're immersed in their work, and they might even have regular moments of flow. They find value in what they do, and they feel valued. They feel confident and well-skilled to provide quality performances, and they're leveraging their strengths and talents through their work. They can authentically express themselves both creatively and personally, and that they find that their job enables them to have opportunities for learning and growth and to be comfortable experimenting through this process. And that they feel like they're contributing to the well-being of others, so that they have lots of positive thoughts and feelings as well, and they can perform valued tasks with competency and help others in the broader community. So that's definitely ideal. And I'm not sure that every performing artist would say that they experience all of those things on a regular basis. And well-being can be quite complex in the sense that you can sometimes feel down, depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, but still also feel really overjoyed at times and feel like you're performing well. So it's complex. You can have either consistent elements of mental health issues and well-being at the same time. So what does a performing artist and the industry overall bring to the table? I think it's really important to acknowledge the joy and benefits that they bring to others. So one, entertainment obviously is an important factor. They're very effective at elevating audiences to feel joy, elation, and awe, to transcend everyday experiences, to release their emotions through, a healthy medium, and to self-reflect. They also provide the opportunity for collective connection and bonding. So that's with the performer and the audience, among the audience, and even among the community that is hosting the event. It also is an opportunity through performance to promote tradition and culture. And of course, there's the benefit of financial revenue. So they bring a lot to the table, but that's a big burden. They give so much, and they can feel exhausted, down, overwhelmed, anxious. And if that's prolonged, it can lead to burnout and mental illness. So what about the performing artist? How do we care for their well-being and help them to flourish, not just to survive? The good news is that well-being is a skill that can be learnt. But it's more likely to happen if they have the right environment and support. So what is the performing arts environment like for the performing artist? High stakes, high pressure, highly competitive, intense training and performance, and often nowhere to hide. You're in the public eye and the public expectations. To connect with them as the audience, they've got to be able to cope with critical reviews, wonder about who's going to turn up. So there's a lot to think about, and performers need to be resilient, adaptable, and flexible. The issue, though, is that performing artists, if you look at the statistics, they report very grim statistics in terms of the mental health that they experience is not health, it's mental illness most of the time. And there's a high use of substance abuse as well. And so currently the system's not actually working for performing artists. So we need to ask some tough questions to improve the well-being of our performing artists. Why is the industry, government and community, why aren't they doing more to support the performing artists as a whole person emotionally and psychologically, not just physically and technically? Can work conditions be improved? Thinking about they're on the road, they have late nights, they're often isolated, away from family, intense work periods, job instability. There's lots for them to contend with. And so, you know, we've got to ask the question, is the performing arts industry contributing to creating a culture of performers who are obsessively passionate about their work? And this is a question that I pose. It's great to have passion, and there's some theory. Bob Vella-Brodrick has talked about passion theory, where harmonious passion is ideal, but obsessive passion is not ideal, where it consumes you. Your passion, your work consumes you. And so we really need to think about ways of restoring the mental health and well-being of performing artists. And if I get the opportunity throughout this panel, I'll make some suggestions of how we might be able to do that. But I know that our panel members will certainly put forward some wonderful suggestions and provoke some good thought in us. So I'll hand over to Dianne.
Thanks so much, Dianne. I really like the way you talked about the sort of the multi-dimensional nature of well-being, and you know, you didn't really mention money and wealth there as a sort of measure of well-being, and that's good because artists don't tend to have much money, but they certainly have a sense of purpose. Yeah. So Jane, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I'm taking a slightly different tack, but I am going to be covering some of the similar issues. So for me, we have many social, economic, geopolitical, and cultural challenges facing us all, and we need tools to manage these. We need to be resilient. We need to have that dynamic capacity for adaptation, change, and agility. And this can lead to homeostasis and balance and equilibrium. And all of these constructs can be approached in many diverse ways. And there's no one single panacea for this. However, I want to propose that the arts represent a very useful tool in this whole area of life we face. The arts represent a range of creative expressions of cultural practices. They encompass diverse and multiple modes of thinking, doing, and cross extensive ranges of activities, from stories and visual arts to theatre, dance, music, and combinations of all of these. Without doubt, these are dynamic, constant features of life, from cradle to grave. I'm dazzled by the way in which scientific methods can aid us to understand how the active ingredients of these arts can combine to affect change on us all. And we should be doing this. For example, I've been involved in measuring how much singing can increase lung function for someone with lung disease, or improve speech volume for someone with Parkinson's disease. Great, measurable, and good for the justification of these practices and understanding how they work. We need to find ways to tease out those active ingredients. What parts of these practices can give us benefit? There are 7 capacities identified for how music can work with us and for us. It's engaging, it's emotional, it's physical, it's synchronous, it's personal, it's social, it's persuasive. We can keep on teasing out how best to make these elements coalesce. And as educators in our faculty, not only do we train artists to be better at their craft, we look at how we can tease out these elements to deliver those arts in their applied practices. I have a colleague sitting here who runs the Creative Arts Therapies course, and part of what they're doing is indeed that. Some of these elements cannot be so easily measured or teased out. We want to look at the full value of the arts front and center. There is an aesthetic element to these cultural and ritualized components that often can be diminished if we look really for the benefit in terms of an applied outcome. We need to keep thinking about the artistic practice in and of itself. So my question becomes, how and indeed should we be striving to develop pathways that expand and change cultural practices and articulate arts as specific well-being or health practices? And how can we arrange them and offer them as treatments? And in so doing, are we going to generate new forms of activity with new forms of meaning? And here I want to draw the parallel and get us to think about the huge boom there has been in the use of the gym. 25, 30 years ago, nobody was going to the gym. And now there's a whole industry, there's a whole way of well-being through that kind of activity. Are we using our arts and entertainment, our arts practices, in a way that is optimal for well-being? Or is there some inherent intrinsic value in those artistic activities in and of themselves? And I want to say there is. But I also want to give two contrasting examples if I've got time. I timed my words, so I hope I have. 1 minute. I hope I've got more than 1 minute. How many of you felt shame when you sang at school? Or did you sing at school? That's a commonly held feeling. How many felt the choir at school sucked? They wouldn't do it. And yet, when I undertook a co-designed project with a workforce, the idea of culturally sharing significant lullabies was introduced by the people who participated. And suddenly we found in a workplace 54 culturally and linguistically diverse lullabies. People were proud and wanted to show and tell and teach one another about their culture through this highly emotive form of communication. The atmosphere at work changed. There was an emotional expression, there was joy, tears. There was this not only collective feeling, but this feeling of the music and the words. We sang on trains up in Coburg. We performed together at the Melbourne Recital Centre. None of those people had formal music lessons. None felt shame in singing. It was deeply meaningful for self-other relations, for their family interactions, and that, of course, had knock-on well-being benefits. So the point I'm making is don't put the cart before the horse. Keep the art front and center. Have I got time or have I got to stop?
Really, but we're so interested that we'd like you to carry on. So carry on.
I've got one more example. Can I give you my one more example? My one more example is that in 2022, there was a terrible 24 hours of flooding, terrible storms in Creswick. And that whole community was deeply affected. And unfortunately, that was not really covered in the media. And the people who lived there were terribly upset that they were ignored. And the only responders was the very local SES and people who just went out and helped. 18 months later, those people, 35 families, were still out of their homes. I went there with a group of students. We listened closely to those community members describe those events. We then worked with those words and generated a recreation of those events using music and acting. We tested our efforts with the people we'd met. We used their words verbatim. And then we took this finalized micro opera that we'd created to two communities who had been affected by that storm, Clunes and Creswick. The impact on those people was unbelievable. Now, they were not participants in that they weren't singing, but we were singing back to them their words, their feelings. They could relive that moment in the safety of being together with us in the music and in those words, but we took them on a journey that took them to a new place, a place that I believe only that artistic activity could achieve. And the atmosphere in that room was beyond electric. It was amazing. It was crowded with counsellors, with local community members who were affected by the storm, who had not been given a voice. And they were given the opportunity to re-experience that in a safe and sharing way, using the students as a conduit. And for me, the next step would be to move forward with those community members to dare to use their voices and sing and share in the artistic practice and not be ashamed about doing art. So my takeaway is we need to be doing more arts and get the well-being benefit out of the artistic practice itself, and not try to be too led by, I am a social scientist, but I don't want to be led by the science. I want to be led by the artistic aesthetic experience.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Thank you. Lots to say and to discuss. Let's just move straight on to Anneliese, and we'll come back to some of these brilliant points that have been made. Thanks, Anneliese.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Jane and Dianne have highlighted, that there's a lot of health and well-being benefits of being a receiver of the arts or participating in the arts, even without it being an artist in and of itself. I think a lot of the times the discussions centre around the value of the arts, and there is a real emphasis on what the arts can provide. And so there seems to be this paradoxical relationship, in a sense, between arts and well-being, in that the observer, the listener, the receiver can often be having, great benefits to their psychological, emotional well-being, and even their physical health and well-being. But often there's very little focus on those who are providing or creating those benefits for audiences. And as Dianne has highlighted, that performing artists can have some negative consequences from being involved in something they're very passionate about. And whilst that can lead to wellbeing benefits because they are passionate about what they do, there can also be some negative consequences around being involved in that particular area. So one of my questions is how can we balance both the needs of the artist and the audience and foster, I guess, a healthy and sustainable arts culture? And so I was just going to bring it from a slightly different angle, in that, is there something more we can be doing with the education and training for artists? In that, can we be embedding wellbeing or fostering wellbeing through their training, where, as Dianne pointed out, often these artistic environments, even within institutions, perhaps are not necessarily conducive to wellbeing, and that's the nature of the profession, with the competitiveness and all the other aspects that come along with being in that particular field. So is there somewhere that arts institutions, is it even possible to be able to prioritise wellbeing alongside artistic achievement within an environment where it is, striving for constant perfection that could lead to, maybe striving for the ideal body image or a flawless performance? There's a high, reliance on external feedback and public scrutiny. Success is often defined as being very dependent on getting that positive critique from an audience or from the public. And the dedication of artists in the hours that they'll put into mastering their art can be quite incredible. The amount of time spent in training or in rehearsals, often isolated time in practice, a lot of personal sacrifice. So is there somewhere that we can be helping them through their education and training And one way we could do this is to embed it into some of their subject courses, and its very positive focus is starting to happen in higher education around this issue, where you'll find that certainly within performing arts institutions, there are subjects around health and wellbeing that are incorporated into the courses. But I wonder if there's more that we could be doing. And when we sort of think about the fact that these artists are often starting their training, it's not just about how we do it, I guess, but about when we do it, because artists have been training often since childhood. So they're coming into their higher education degrees already with quite a strong identity around their art, and perhaps some issues and problems and challenges that may be already quite entrenched. And the tendency is to deal with them, I guess, reactively. So once they arise and once they occur, which can make it harder to solve. So is there some way that we can be more proactive in their education and be introducing ways of enhancing or fostering wellbeing right through from the beginning of their training? And that might even be, in primary school. So I guess my second question is, it's not just about doing it or how we do it, it's about when we do that.
Anneliese, thank you. Thank you so much. I like the way we're sort of addressing both the well-being of artists and arts for well-being. And there really is that, those two questions really. And it's a continuum, I'm sure. On the one hand, arts is good for us, but also doing art day after day may have detrimental impacts. So that's a question. And yeah, thank you. Derrick, how would you respond to that?
Thanks, Emma. I agree with you. I think it is interesting that we're taking it from two different perspectives. I, as all of my colleagues, took a completely different perspective. So I would invite you all to think of the reality that there are 7.9 billion people on planet Earth at the moment. Pause for dramatic effect. Almost 8 billion people. Of those 8 billion people, 85% of them make up the global majority. And putting aside what that means for the moment, the global majority is those of the Asian diaspora, the Black diaspora, and the Latin diaspora. So that the beautiful lattes, macchiatos, caramels, mochas, and dark chocolates are in fact the global majority. And the first provocation is when we start to think about our well-being, because that's what's so beautifully listed in the rider, our well-being. As I look around this audience, I see many of those beautiful colors here tonight. So we've already taken one step in the right direction. Of those 85%, 470 million of them are from indigenous populations, from New Zealand all the way to Iceland. So that when we talk about our well-being, we think perhaps it's good to zoom out as well in terms of how we like to think of it. That's the first provocation for you to chew on and formulate questions to ask all of us, for the artists as well as those who aren't artists. The second is we all dance. Some of us like no one's watching. Others loud and proud, while still others only inebriated. But we all do it. As you saw in the opening clip, what dancers do really well is take the mundane and make it extraordinary. For the movements you saw on the screen, those are trained dancers, yet each and every one of you must have recognized gestures or moments that come from your childhood when you reached for another person, when you shook someone's hand. You've been dancing since you've heard your mother's heartbeat or your father's heartbeat, or they picked you up and shook you to sleep. Dance is movement, and movement is dance. We have in dance a famous philosopher. Her name is Maxine Sheets Johnston. She's an octogenarian. She's now 89 years old. And she says it this way: movement forms the I that moves before the I that moves forms movement. Long before you have the ego to sit in the chair you're sitting in, you've been moving. So to the question for the future of arts, what can dance mean for that? I would turn the question around. It's not whether or not the future will have arts, it's where the future will have arts. And I have thoughts about that in the post-apocalyptic, dystopic world we currently live in, where that could be, but I'll leave that for the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Derrick. I have nothing to say other than brilliant, of course. Let's come back. But Nikki, would you like to round us off?
Thanks, Emma. Not sure how to follow that. I'll come from another angle entirely again. I'd like to talk a bit more about social benefits of the arts. I think it's incredibly important at the moment. We're experiencing a bit of an epidemic of loneliness. 1 in 3 Australians feels lonely. And I don't think our current approaches to managing loneliness have been very effective. We tend to medicalise loneliness. We tend to treat it as if it's something to be fixed and something that's about the individual, when it's clearly something that sits in a social context. I think the way that we manage loneliness just further stigmatises something that's a very natural, not always a pleasant condition, but a very natural condition. So I've been very interested in looking at community-embedded approaches to managing loneliness and isolation. And one of those that's gaining a lot of interest at the moment is known as social prescription. And this starts trying to connect people who might be feeling isolated or lonely with social opportunities in their environment. And one of the most popular activities is the arts. And there's a lot of great evidence for the benefits of participating in arts activities in your community. So I think it's wonderful that social prescription is starting to build that into this medical system, and GPs are starting to refer people to the arts. A lot of the evidence has actually come out of the UK and tends to be focused on older individuals, and the evidence is really effective. You know, connecting them with community choirs, for example, has really yielded fantastic evidence in terms of well-being and social connection. My question is, how suitable is what we've got in social prescription for younger people? One of my interests is in bringing youth-friendly interventions for wellbeing for young people. So I think we need to be innovative in how we look at social prescription. I think it's a great model, but how can we actually bring it so it's engaging and empowering for young people? So my first question is, what if we prescribed live music for young people? So, yep. So one of the I guess the initial reasons for me to be interested in this, I'm an avid attendee of hard rock live music, and I often go spot the psychologist. I'm looking around at everyone else instead of looking at the front, which is a bit naughty. But what I notice over and over again is an overwhelming feeling of togetherness, quite powerful. I'm not even talking to anyone, but I feel it. I feel part of this community, and it's very strong. I think it's a lot of gain for very little effort. So it's a bit of a sneak peek. I don't have to put a lot of effort into connecting, but I get all this wonderful community feeling. We've recently done a very large review on live music attendance
the social benefits of being in an audience, trying to understand why you get this wonderful feeling, this community feeling from those events. And there are lots of benefits, but two that were really profound that I'd like to share with you. The first was around a term that's known as collective effervescence, Emil Durkheim. And the idea is that if you're sharing the same emotions, moving with other people, same identity, same values, and there are a lot of you, this feeling of collective effervescence can often bubble up, and it's quite powerful, phenomenal feeling. And I started understanding that's what I feel too. The second main theme that came out was a feeling of a safe haven, somewhere to actually feel that you could be yourself. And this was particularly important for people from marginalised communities, quite a few studies on the LGBTQI community, and people living with a disability who found that going into the live music space gave them an opportunity to really feel trust, respect, and be themselves, which was very different than their normal life. So both of these two themes were quite powerful. Another underlying theme was if these experiences could be maintained, if you attend regularly and you maintain those relationships, perhaps now online through fan groups, a sense of belonging could start building up that was quite long-term and could be maintained. Okay, so this all sounds great. Why don't we do this? I'm not sure if you've noticed, but live music is dying. And I know that's a bit of a provocative statement in this environment, but we know that, for example, festivals are collapsing. You know, 1 in 2 only make a profit. We've seen the loss of some of our favourite festivals recently. Artists are suffering. We've heard examples here of the mental health of artists. They experienced severe psychological distress, 4 times the rate of the general population. Audiences, they're staying home. Compared to a few years ago, half as many people attend weekly live music events. So there's some serious issues happening here. And if you project forward, our provocation was to imagine a world without arts. I put forward, imagine a world without live music. And it's frightening. It means the main way that we'd engage with music would be largely a digital product. It means that artists wouldn't have any place to emerge, to find their feet. And it means audiences wouldn't get to participate in this wonderful experience that has all these social and wellbeing benefits. But we can turn around, we can do it. And the government is already investing in trying to work out ways to challenge some of the barriers. So for me, one of the great solutions is collaborative efforts like what we've got here, the intersection of arts and wellbeing and science. And I think together also with the music industry, with government and community, we can really collaborate to overcome the barriers that people are experiencing. Some of them are cost, location, safety, access. But we can also understand much more deeply what actually contributes to those social benefits of participating as well as performing arts. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. Bang on time, pretty much. These panel members were really good at sticking to time. Thank you so much, all of you, for really provocative ideas and thoughts. I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things, but we will be turning to the audience for questions, so start thinking up your question. I was just going to pick up really on what Nikki's just said, and absolutely the audiences are dwindling when it comes to watching dance and watching music. However, participating in dance, the actual doing dance is increasing, and the making of music. So the participatory element is going up, even though audience numbers are going down. So that's interesting because you picked up on the sort of social prescribing that happens in the UK, and a lot of that social prescribing is around participating, the making of art. And it kind of reflects some of what Dianne was saying around the components of well-being, the sort of relatedness and competence, the belonging, and the sort of sense of purpose, performing valued tasks. They were really key components there that really meant a lot. And I'm just wondering, Nikki, so social health and social prescribing, what's the economic benefit of prescribing sort of social, artistic, participatory activity? Is prevention, for example, through arts, cheaper than treatment in the end? And if so, why hasn't the health service kind of picked up on this?
Great question, Emma. Thank you. I think we're in the midst of trying to understand some of the benefits. I think most of the research on social prescribing has currently come out of the UK, and they have estimated about $4 return on investment for every dollar invested. So we often pick up on that. It's being replicated across different types of activities. Obviously, it would be different for different types of involvement, different populations. And so most of that research has been done with older populations, so it'd be great to explore it further. Why hasn't it been picked up? Great question. Why isn't it picked up? Now, it is in the UK. It is covered by the health system. If we had it here, it would be covered by Medicare. So there's quite a large movement known as Aspire in Australia, who is is working with government and trying to get that on the agenda, so we can actually get it incorporated into the health system return. So I have hope. I think it will be. And I think you're right, there are more people participating. There's more people still interested. Young people want to participate in live music more as well, and they know it's good for their health. There was a recent survey that demonstrated 2 in 3 understood that it was good for their mental health and well-being to participate as an audience member in the arts. So I think it's all there. It's just the enabling factors we need to understand. Yep.
Thank you. More data needed, yeah. And Jane, just picking up, you gave some great empirical studies, examples of empirical studies that have shown that participatory arts really does enhance health, and some beautiful case studies there of lived experiences. And you mentioned the gym, and of course, we know that, certain art forms have a physical element. Dance has been mentioned. Dance is good physically, but you've talked about arts being more than that, more than just going to the gym. What is the active ingredient then?
Well, I think I've actually listed them according to Bill Thompson's research, and they're actually the same ones that Dianne was talking about. So it's about the engagement, it's about the emotional connection, it's about the physicality, real or implied, and this capacity, certainly with music and movement, to create a synchrony moving together. Now, we're talking about performing arts here, of course. We're not talking about visual art, but so much. And it's personal and it's social, and of course it's deeply persuasive. And I think that's the point I was trying to make about the aesthetic component to that and how critical that is. And just to cross-refer to Nikki with the social prescribing, I think a huge issue for social prescribing in Australia is distance. I think it is, we're not the UK, I'm from the UK. You feel as though you're going a long way if you drive for an hour in the UK. Here, an hour's nothing. So how do we cater to provide this proximity and this aesthetic feeling that people need to be together when they're living, at great distances?
And particularly because you have to give a range of activities. If you've got a dance class nearby in one town, that might not be attractive to some people. It might be that they want to do some visual arts, some painting, or so you need a range of arts. Yeah.
And I just hark back to Creswick. Creswick has been running the most incredibly successful folk and roots festival over the past 3 or 4 years. And it's because it's community focused. It's working from the local community and their needs, and it's building up capacity. A difficulty with a lot of music festivals is that the financial modeling of it isn't to do with a local community. It's to do with bringing people in from outside. So I think we need to think long, deep and hard about what Australia is, and who we are and how we can work with those structures.
And just picking up on something that Anneliese, you spoke a bit about sort of the training environment of artists and that it might not be optimal. You know, in many art forms, the education and the training of an artist is a sort of handed down practice. Can you say something about that? And maybe if there was one thing we could look at further, what would it be in terms of research? What would we measure in the training environment of artists?
Sorry, is it on now? Yes. I think you make a very good point in that the practice is often handed down. And so certainly my background is in music, and so teachers tend to teach the way they have been taught. And so a lot of that training is involved around, you know, mastering the instrument and technique and expression, but not necessarily mastering or learning those psychological performance skills and the kinds of skills that will help them to cope with the inevitable challenges that we know are going to arise when you pursue a path, an artistic journey or career. So I think it is trying to change the culture a little bit in the training of those who are doing the training, so that it is extending past perhaps just at the subject level in arts institutions where they are starting to introduce subjects that might or that address health and well-being, but that it extends further into, you know, their individual lessons and right throughout the institution. That's not so easily addressed. But the research is there has been some research done in are teachers able to adapt and able to deliver strategies without specialised training. So there is some research being conducted in those areas.
Thanks. And how do we measure obsessive passion and harmonious passion, Dianne?
So it's important to understand the definitions, I guess, of harmonious and obsessive passion. So we all know that it's great to feel passionate about something, but if the passion is consuming you, not allowing you to function effectively in other areas of your life, then that's not healthy. If you think about the definition of well-being that I was talking about, feeling good, functioning well, and the functioning well is really important to understand that you determine how well you're functioning based on what you value. And so if you value something, are you able to pursue that and pursue that to the standard that gives you satisfaction, that gives you fulfillment? And so if you are obsessively passionate about something and that's turning you away from other important valued functions, then that becomes problematic. And the intensity in which performers need to invest in their trade, if you like, is so intense in order for them to make it, because of the competitive environment that they face, that it makes it challenging to be anything other than obsessively passionate. That's the culture that is often, encouraged in order for people to succeed. And I think this is where workplaces need to really think about the culture that they're espousing, and to think about having more conversations about well-being, to think about having more conversations about a balanced lifestyle. And this is what we talk about, well-being literacy, as being important. I mean, I don't know whether it's commonplace to be talking to your supervisor or amidst your peers about how you're performing from a well-being perspective rather than just a physical performance perspective. It's all interrelated. It's all holistic. And these are important conversations to have. And I think another really important concept is job crafting. Really thinking about, okay, things are not ideal. How would I like my ideal workplace to be? And how can I influence that in some way? And job crafting can speak to that to some extent, where you might have the opportunity to think about crafting tasks that you do? And can you have more control over doing more tasks that you like and less that you don't like? Sometimes that's not always possible, but you might focus on relational crafting instead and thinking about, well, can you work with others that you really enjoy working with, or an audience that you really love to perform to? Can you work in that environment a bit more? Or even cognitive crafting, where you change your mindset. And so you might be really upset or feel like that you're not being appreciated, but you might really think about the meaning that you're creating. You're bringing a whole community together, and, you know, there could be lots of benefits of that, even though there might be minor things that haven't gone so well. Think of the bigger collective meaning that might be involved. So I think we can all play a small role in changing the work environment through a few of those important strategies.
Thanks. It's almost like well-being is everyone's responsibility, right? Whole systems approach as opposed to just the well-being coordinator. It's not, let's not throw the students over to the well-being coordinator, but just assume that it's everyone's responsibility. Derrick, you spoke so much. Well, you actually didn't speak much, but you said such a lot in what you said. Our well-being, whose well-being, well-being for who, safety for who. A lot of the research that we draw upon in well-being science for performing artists and artists has been undertaken by white people, mainly based on certain dance forms or certain aspects of arts, classical music, as opposed to other forms. So the applicability of findings from that research is questionable. Can you talk a bit about that and how we can ensure that our research that we do in this area is inclusive and relevant for everyone?
Thanks for that. I mean, I think you and I, Emma and I, have had continual conversations about WEIRD. I don't know if you know this acronym. White, educated, continue. Do we know the rest? Industrialized, keep going. Rich, and what's the final one? Democratic. Yeah, so that's absolutely not to say something's wrong with that. It's just to indeed to contextualize how we interpret our findings. A great example is the passion constructs from Vella-Brodrick, the Canadians. One of the questions about that research now, so not in the beginning, but now, is as you have a now new generation of Indigenous dancers and artists coming through in Canada, and no doubt here as well, how applicable are those definitions of not harmonious passion, but especially thwarting passion, or passion that is debilitating. Some cultures thrive on competition, whilst other cultures die in a competitive state. Our psychometric scales don't yet encompass those interpretations. So one of the things that we find now in work with autistic individuals in the medical community, so that's quite encouraging, is the buy-in from the participants or the patients themselves. They actually write the research questions. They actually co-design the research with the researchers. So what would happen if we had individuals that were dancing in one, let's say, academy from different cultures? Because very often we say, oh, we're all Australian. Yes, but someone from a Greek family might perceive food radically different than someone from an Asian family. And I'm using the big Asian with an A, because when you start to break it down, there's a huge diversity there. Passion, ways of working in every microculture in every family that can be perceived very differently. So that kind of buy-in from the participants in our universities and our institutes would be a great thing to do. Ask this separate question. You as an Australian who might be from a different cultural background, let's say Greek, how do you perceive passion? And see if that's the same across all different types of Australians. We would be surprised at how different that is.
You, Derrick. I think that's a really great moment to move to the audience and to ask what questions and comments you may have. And to warm you all up, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to just turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, but then ask a question or come up with a question between you, one question or one comment. We won't get through all of you, but at least we've warmed you up. So 60 seconds, go.
Clearly ready. Uh-oh.
There you go.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Am I going to get you back? Just rounding off. What? Oh gosh, we're just so impressed with how quickly you were, how eager you were to talk to each other. Thank you. Gosh, I never thought I'd get you back, but we're back. So, Who has a question or a comment? Yes. Now we've got 2 mics, so you can, and as one person's talking, we could also, if you just put your hands up, who does have and I can make sure that we go straight to the next person. Who else has a question or a comment? A couple of people. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's go for it. And I'm going to ask our panel members to be quite quick in responding if that's appropriate, so that we can get as many questions as possible said. Okay. First person.
Hi, my question's to Dr. Derrick. Is there a bigger well-being benefit for young children to learn structured dance, or do we just put, I'm in early childhood, or do we just put the music on and allow children to dance?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a and. I think one of the most wonderful parts of dance in early childhood is exploration. So from a motor control perspective, you learn a tremendous amount of dexterity, we call it. So physical dexterity by just exploring the space. Within that exploration, what is very important for young children in an unstructured environment, let's say quote unquote, is to offer spatial variation. So think along the lines of an architect. What would you add into the space that offers challenge, physical challenge to the children? And that could be soft fabrics, soft things that they can climb over, but also things that they learn to hold on to as well. So that's the unstructured, we would call that improvisation, let's say. It is vitally important that they also learn, let's say, codified or codified dance. When kept in check, it can teach them a lot about discipline. When out of balance, it becomes an obsession that is not as positive as we would like it. So it's and I would just simply add to that, when you do that is very important. Before the ages of 7, it's very important that we learn to play. We have a professor here in the audience now whose work in creative therapy is about play, Drew Bird. And play is a vital part of how we learn to engage with each other. So that unstructured play, as long as possible, is really great. And then add some structure to that as they get a bit older. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Question here.
Thank you. To be provocative, because I thought that was one of the aspects, how does the arts differ from the play and the sports? Because obviously sports is an area where a lot more funding. They'll probably give you social scripts for sports before they give it to you for music and dance. So is there any research that shows how vastly superior the arts are to play and sports?
Good question. Jane, do you want to answer this, or Nikki? Nikki.
I guess a few different answers. I'll just come in from a neuroscience perspective. The number of areas of the brain that are recruited during music performance and music listening and music participation, it recruits more areas of the brain than any other activity, including sports. So we've already knocked it off and said, if you want to come from the hard science, it's activating more, not just brain areas, but functions and capacities. Jane gave us a lovely list of those. So yeah, I'll pass to
It's
Jane.
because they're happening simultaneously. So we're not saying that sport's a lesser thing. It's, of course, it's horses for courses. That, you know, there are preferences as well. People have preferences. And I think it would be naive to say that, you know, some people aren't preferring to do some activities above others. But certainly in terms of the multiple simultaneous things that are happening, the capacities that are engaged, there's more happening, I would say. And also there's this, I'm going to harp on about it, but there's this aesthetic component in the artistic practice. And of course you can do sports with an aesthetic as well. And then that boundary between running and running in a dance is a very fine line. So we're not saying one thing goes in one bucket and one thing goes in the other. It's just not that straightforward.
question, though.
And if you look, if we take Derrick's examples of looking in different cultural contexts, I have to say, I'll just give you one little example. I went to the northern part of Limpopo province in South Africa, up near the Zimbabwe border. And that particular family group, heritage group, of course, the border of Zimbabwe is a completely random thing, lived across that border. And with this amazing rainbow curriculum that was put in post-apartheid, children were exposed to many things. And one of the things was traditional cultural practice within the school context, but out of lesson time. It was done as an extracurricular activity, which I thought was interesting. But they were doing sports. And those sports were pretty meaningless. I was watching the girls doing the sports, and they were dancing and they were practicing doing the netball, and they were putting it in a context that was meaningful to them.
Thank you, Jane. There's one question here and then there's a question up here. Yeah.
I just want to separate both the education and the community facets because I've got interest in both. I know a lot of a lot of music teachers, and I learned last year that Queensland has a much better music culture in the schools than we do down here. And that made me sad, but it made sense. So that's a challenge. I think we should do better. With the community, I've also been involved with Community Music Victoria, so I wanted to give them a bit of a showing, and they've got this concept of social catalysts in the areas. So at the moment, I'm liaising with a social catalyst to get a choir jam out west. So I'm in a low socioeconomic area, and we can go into all the facets of distribution of resources. But I just open up question.
Thank you for that. I might just hold that comment and have one more question, then we can answer both. But thank you, and thank you for all you do. Thank you. Question.
It's been wonderful listening to all of you. I could listen to you for hours. My comment is more about widening the perspective a bit, because there are other art forms, particularly creative writing or the written word. And it's not just publishing opportunities, but it's attending spoken word venues, whether part of the audience or participating. There is music in words, in the rhythm. There are literary festivals. There are just so many avenues there as well in that form, in that part of the arts, that it's also worthwhile, I guess, getting some type of perspective, represented on a stage like this, which is wonderful. But it just leaves a lot of curiosity as well about what else could be, what other research, what other studies could be brought to the table.
Absolutely, really great comment. And it's true, we are only representing certain art forms, or we've only talked about certain art forms, but I can imagine a lot of the components of well-being that Dianne expressed at the beginning could be equally applied, and more research is needed in all those areas. And essentially what we're talking about is creativity, isn't it? What does it mean to create and make and speculate, and what does that do for our well-being? Yeah, thank you. Question over here.
So my name's Lars. I'm 16 years old. And when you brought up the whole cultures thing about how it reminded me of my own culture and being half Italian, half Indian, and how passion is interpreted in different ways. And in my culture of Indian culture, it's very much that the passion is led by money and revenue. And I just want to know, to the whole panel, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you so much. That's a great comment. Dianne or Derrick? Derrick?
Thanks for your question, and I'll let Dianne grab on that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that schism, if you will, of being bicultural offers you tremendous opportunities, because you have both of those cultures coming at the idea of value from two different perspectives, one being an economic one, and looking at the entire Italian Renaissance of how important art is to that culture as well. So for you, you have a plus point in that way of how you choose to sort of meander through your difference. But you're absolutely right. That does make a big difference depending on where you're from. Dianne perhaps has more research relevant.
Yes, I think, you know, it's important to be able to distinguish between what is an internal motivation and an external motivation that's driving you. And sometimes culture is really important and the historical context is really important. You value it and you want to drive the decisions you make. And in some instances, it's not as important. You have your own individual personality, your own motives that are not necessarily linked strongly to a culture. And I think it's important to be authentic and to really have a check-in from time to time to what that motive is and what is driving that motive. And sometimes we can lose track of that because it's so deeply entrenched, it's almost like a routine. And I think there needs to be some caution. As long as there's value alignment and there's congruence, that's the important thing. And often you feel it in your gut, whether it's right or wrong. But if you're wanting to stay with something for the long run in a sustained and meaningful and valuable way, the intrinsic motivation is a really important element to it.
Thanks for that. Yes, enjoyment is a big predictor of adherence. You're more likely to stick with it if you enjoy it. There are so many comments and questions in the audience, but we're running out of time. So I'm just going to take 2 more questions. I'll take them both together, or maybe 3, and then we'll sum up. So we'll just take them all in a row. So first one.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. If there is an increase in the general population's well-being by participating in creative expression, yet art is typically created by artists only, is kind of the stigma and associate expectation there. How do we overcome the barrier to participation by non-artists, those of us who are not artists, but want to still be creative?
Thank you. Jane's already got the microphone, but I'm holding her. 2 or 3. Let's just hear all the questions. Come on.
My question goes really well after that. I'm wondering about early learning centres and schools and how we can really support teachers and educators to build their confidence to participate throughout their classrooms in learning environments in the arts like music, dance, and other creative practices. And also then for children and young people to have their school environments and their early learning centres as environments where we can really foster really positive wellbeing. So I'd love to hear if there was anything that you'd love to see happening in our schools and education centres.
Indeed, thank you. Brilliant. One down here.
And I just wanted to mention the reality of arts funding in Australia. I work in a medium-sized arts organization, and at the moment, and for the past few years, actually, about 80% of our income comes from health, education, and philanthropists who are interested in well-being. We are not funded to make art, so we found ourselves needing to upskill and needing to address, because our projects are centered around well-being because of the nature of the funding. So we are now finding ourselves needing to become, therapists or people who need those very specific skills to be able to fulfill the programs that we are funded for.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. One last question. So hold the mic. Oh, all right. All right. 1, 2, and then that's it. Yes, great. Great questions.
Thank you. Dare I ask, I'm just interested to the panel members on your thoughts on the breakdancing at the Olympic Games.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
How long do we have?
Maybe this adds to this question, but my question is about the role of joy in producing well-being outcomes for people who participate or make art. So I guess, links to breakdance at the Olympic Games.
Wow, these are all really great comments. And of course, we won't have time to answer them all. But because we're running out of time, but we are all meeting for a drink outside, and the panel members, I'm not going to let them go. They're here to answer more questions. But maybe, Jane, do you want to sum up those 4 questions?
I can say education is the gateway to everything, is it not? And if that's education coming from a parent, a grandparent, a community group, a primary school teacher, whatever, and it is shit in this country that there are not compulsory arts in primary schools. I could not believe it. When I moved here from the UK, that I moved to Western Australia, and it was not a compulsory part of the curriculum to do music in primary school. I couldn't believe it. If you look at civilization and the history of civilization, we are essentially people who are doing creative projects together. So that's what shocks me. So it's to go to this point, to that point. And education means many things. It's not just about being in a faculty of education, but without education, we're stuffed.
Thank you, Jane. Nikki just wanted one last word.
Yeah, I just wanted one last word because I had an answer to, I was trying to answer all 4 questions at once. First of all, Ray Gunn, she's awesome. Don't let anyone tell you anything differently. But the idea of novices and early career childhood access and trying to get people who aren't used to participating in the arts, there is something we haven't spoken about at all tonight, and it's around AI. And it's a dirty word, and it's often not embraced. It's threatening artists' lives and income, but it's also got a really positive side, and some of the work being done in education with AI has really opened up pathways for novices to start understanding both in written word, so the creative written word, literary arts, visual arts and music. I'm not sure about dancing yet. But it's really opening pathways. So it is a potential answer to some of those different questions, and happy to talk more about that later.
And just to tag on to that, one of the great things about the University of Melbourne at the moment is that we have at the VCA Motion Capture Lab and a virtual reality and extended reality lab. And the dancers of the future are learning about coding. They are learning about those virtual spaces. They are dancing in those virtual spaces. One of the lecturers is here now, is one of the people who set the stage for them to see her in a virtual environment and learn about different ways of moving. So it is happening, you're right. It doesn't have to be threatening. Yeah. Sorry, Emma.
It's okay. Brilliant. I have a couple of things just to say to finish off, but can we thank our amazing panel very much? Thank you. Well, I know we've thoroughly enjoyed ourselves this evening. I hope you have as well. Just a couple of things. I mean, thank you to our alumni who are here. The university really loves connecting with all our alumni. Keep an eye out for future alumni events. Your feedback helps us create events for you as well. So if you get a survey to fill out, please do, because it does shape the future events that we're able to put on for you. You're welcome to join us in the foyer for some light refreshments where you'll be able to continue the conversations. But I just have one question for you, just to answer in your head. What is it that you've learned this evening? If there's one thing that you've learned, what is that? Or if there's one thing that you're going to do as a result of this evening, what is it? Just to answer yourself. Thank you so much. Good night. Thank you.